Good afternoon and welcome to the fourth episode of the AA podcast, where we charge up your day with other people's life stories. Today is May 23rd, and I am your host, Adit. And joining me today is Sabareesh, but as he's known on the mean streets of Queens, he's Sab, and I know him as Coach Sab from intramural basketball. Sab, if you want to talk a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so as Adit mentioned, it's Sabareesh. I met Adit at Stony Brook University, where we just finished our first year at college. Some of the things I like to do, as you mentioned, we play a lot of basketball, so I'm a big sports fan. And other than that, I also play an instrument. I play a classical Indian instrument called a mridangam, two-sided drum, and I've been doing that for about 5 years, so that's been pretty fun. And yeah, so a big part of my life is sports, and as Adit mentioned, basketball is pretty big, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
So one thing I wanted to talk about is you live in Queens, so I wanted to discuss what it's been like growing up in New York City for you, and how the quarantine has really affected just how the dynamic of New York City has been for the last few weeks.
Right. So, when people think of the city, they usually only think of Manhattan, but there are 4 other boroughs, including Queens, where I'm from. And growing up in Queens has been pretty cool. It's considered the diverse capital of the world. And it's been good to get to know other people, other traditions and ethnicities. And it's a good surrounding and good environment to be around. And the city itself is a pretty awesome place to be. And I know for a fact that I haven't seen everything the city has to offer. And I know for a fact that a lot of tourists have definitely seen more than what I've seen in the city. And the quarantine has definitely affected the city. Mostly like other places, we didn't feel that the virus would have a huge impact on our people. But the city, the number of cases in both the city and its outskirts, such as Long Island, started to ramp up, which caused the quarantine and the quote unquote lockdown. And currently, the number of cases, the number of deaths related to COVID-19 have gone down, which is a great sign. And I know Governor Cuomo, even today, just said that the city and all of the state could even reopen on Wednesday, which is pretty good signs considering how bad the situation was just a couple weeks ago. And as for the guidelines as such, people are somewhat maintaining the guidelines. In my neighborhood, I know people are very strict and they have been following guidelines. They've been wearing masks, haven't been going out as often. I know in our family, only my dad heads out maybe once a week to get groceries. Otherwise, we don't step out of the house at all. And one of the main things the governor and even the mayor is suggesting is masks, and that it's saving lives of New Yorkers. It's saving the lives of frontline workers. And the governor stresses every day in his press conference that the masks have been pretty important. And the number of COVID-related diagnoses in frontline workers are significantly smaller compared to that of just a regular resident and a regular citizen of the city and the state. So the quarantine has definitely affected the city and the state as a whole, but I'm sure we're going to hold in there and hopefully we'll be out and about real soon.
That's awesome that you guys are just really so hopeful and very adamant on making sure that quarantine is properly followed. How important would you say it's been to have Cuomo as kind of the guy at the helm in terms of leading efforts? Because he obviously is taking this very seriously ever since it's escalated and hasn't really, cracked under any political criticism that he's had in recent weeks. So how has that impacted your family, you and your family, as long as the other people that you know?
Right. So Governor Cuomo, one of his main things was not to make it a political issue, and he's more about the safety of the people. To him, saving one life would make that, just saving one life would be pretty important to him rather than having this whole outbreak get worse. And his doings have definitely impacted our lives positively. I know my dad tunes in every day around 11 o'clock to his press conferences, as do a lot of the other people in the state. And I feel it's important to hear one voice that's displaying, some positivity every day and stressing more important things. There's a lot of things going around with the NYPD not doing enough, I guess. But having Cuomo reassuring that, state police and other EMT frontline workers are really doing their hardest, their best job, the best that they can do, really assures you as a person of the state and the city that everything is going to be okay. So he definitely has impacted us positively.
That's great to hear. It really, I feel, comes down to just having, like as you mentioned, a leader who does inject some kind of optimism and enthusiasm into the idea that like things will get better. It's really good to have that kind of leader who's constantly leading by example.
Exactly.
So I wanted to go back to what it was like growing up in New York City. So you mentioned that there are 4 other boroughs outside of Manhattan, which is what most people typically think of when it comes to New York City. Is there that kind of interborough rivalry that you've ever experienced between like your friends or anyone at Stony Brook? Because I know a lot of New York City kids go to Stony Brook.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I went to school in another one of the boroughs in the Bronx. So in the Bronx, there's obviously going to be your Bronx kids. You're going to have a lot of the Queens kids that come in and the Manhattan kids. I'd say right off the bat, my freshman year, I haven't really talked to too many kids from Manhattan, having only really stayed in my area of Queens. But getting to know them, there's always a bit of that rivalry, like, oh, which borough is the best? We can say Queens has City Field, we have tennis stadiums, and the Manhattan kids will come back, oh, we have Madison Square Garden, we have Penn Station. And be like, oh, you guys can't leave the city or leave the country without coming to JFK. What are you guys gonna do, right? So there's always gonna be a bit of that rivalry, and that rivalry also came into Stony Brook. You always think your borough, and obviously there's also a bit of rivalry between high schools in the city. So you're always going to think your borough and your high school is the best. So that's always fun. There's a lot to do in every borough in the city. So I recommend always checking each borough. There's always things to do, places to go and visit, to eat. There's always little spots that are going to be really cool to visit. And that's what's amazing about the city.
Was there a moment in your childhood where you kind of came to that moment of realization of like, wow, New York City is really just this diverse place? Like, was there that one moment where you realized that, or was it more so a gradual process?
So I'd say it's more of a gradual process. We got like pretty involved, like me and my sister, we got involved at our temple, and we did a lot of outreach, which led us to meet a lot of people. I think one of the main things we had was a couple events at the Queens Museum where we would, display our culture, but also learn about, a lot of the other cultures. So I think events like those set up by the temple and even our schools would be pretty, keen on letting people and everyone know about other people's traditions and their values. I think my school, at least, I know about other schools, they did the same. They were pretty keen on having kids, accept each other for who they are, and that's what made the city, my city experience, pretty cool.
Is there an aspect of the Queensboro that you feel distinguishes it from the other boroughs? Like you can say with Manhattan, you've got the skyscrapers and all the attractions. With the Bronx, you could say like diversity or the food, but don't quote me on the Bronx part, but is there anything about Queens that you feel distinguishes it from the other boroughs?
I think you're right in saying not to quote you on the Bronx, because the diversity I'm going to take for Queens. It is still considered the diverse capital of the world. I'm going to take that stamp. I mean, that's amazing about Queens. You head into a place like Flushing, you have people of Asian American background and heritage. So you see a lot of other, people just mingling together. And you can go to a place like, Long Island City, which is more, industrial, and people are working there. So there are different parts of Queens that I enjoy a lot. There's a residential part, and there's also a pretty large industrial part. And that's what I enjoy about Queens. The diversity is definitely this is a place to be in the city.
How is that diversity kind of, you've touched upon it a bit, but how has that diversity shaped how you grew up in the city?
Right. So, my parents immigrated here in 2000. so I wasn't born yet. I was born here. So, for them at least, it was a big culture shock. Meeting a lot of different people after being pretty secluded in a country, a South Asian country, and coming to the States is, a big deal. My parents were the first to leave the country in their family, so it was a big deal for them. But after coming here, they got to meet, not only different types of people, but again, learning about their traditions were pretty important. You get to the city and there's just a group of people. There's always this talk of people are better than others, but when a group of ethnicities and communities just come together, it's pretty beautiful, and that's what I think the city is about.
So, I hope you don't mind me prying a bit more, but did your parents come here and to start studying more, or did they just like start working off the bat upon arriving?
Right. So my dad came here to work. So he came in with like an idea of what he was doing with work. So it was first he came, and then my sister and my mom came after, like
Hmm.
3 months after, I think. So for them together, it was tough to start, but they got accustomed to life. And I'm sure if they probably had talk of wanting to move back to India, but I'm sure after living here, it'll be tough. America is great; it has a lot to offer.
I know, at least personally, for my mom and dad, who also both immigrated to the United States, they came with the intention of pursuing master's studies. And
Hmm.
at least for my mom personally, she's talked about how the initial first few months in America were really tough for her in terms of just adjusting to the different cultural norms that
Right.
were associated with college and just how America was different from what she had grown up with in India in terms of like being so close to her family, um, and being like either a bike ride or a motorcycle ride away, just to say hi, and having that
Exactly.
physical distance really took a toll on her for the first
Yeah.
few months. But ultimately, it came down to like her friends and dorm mates just making her feel at home and more comfortable being in the U.S. So there's definitely that like, I guess, hump in terms of immigrating that people have to deal with. But I guess to anyone who like might be struggling with that, the key, I guess, is just to look for that support network of people who always have your back.
Yeah. Definitely.
So living in the city obviously must have like its advantages in terms of just being so close to so much action. What was that experience like in terms of you just being able to go with your family like on any given weekend to like either a parade that might be happening or some kind of event in like Queens, Bronx, Manhattan?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the best things about the city is how it's well connected. Getting from even where we are in Southeast Queens to the city, it does take an hour by bus and train,
Hmm.
but the transit system is amazing in the city. Getting around the city, it's really easy. You just need to find the line, and whether you're going uptown and downtown, and people in the city are pretty helpful. So if you ever end up getting lost, which has happened to me and my friends, uh, you know, there's a good chance there might not be service or the Wi-Fi might not be working. You just ask someone and they will help you. So it was nice, especially as kids, when we don't have as much stress and pressure to just be able to go to say the zoo or head to a parade like you said or an event. In that sense, the city is very well connected. So that was pretty cool.
Is there a specific spot in or a couple of spots in the city that are your favorite go-to places with your friends or family?
Yeah. So I only found out this place last year. I think last year, yeah. And I found out because I was doing something for an astronomy class. It's called the High Line in the city, and it's just a really cool place. You can just walk along. People are, lying down and talking with their friends, their family. It's a good place to just grab a bite, bring like a couple blankets, just sleep, and then you have a good view of New Jersey from there, which is it's super. And then another place I'd say is Gantry State Park, which is in Long Island City, in Queens.
Hmm.
It's a place that has a big Coca-Cola sign. So people are always there taking pictures. It's a great spot. I know a lot of people, whenever I'm there, people are always doing like a wedding photo shoot or a prom photo shoot or something.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's always a pretty nice thing to see. There's always a lot of action there, a lot of grass, a lot of frisbees being thrown around. So it's a good vibe there.
Is there like one of those iconic or like must-see tourist attraction places that you just haven't been able to go to? Like, have you just never been able to go to Empire State Building by any chance? Or is there like a specific spot that you just haven't been able to go to? Or have you seen it all, done it all? You're the master of NYC.
I've definitely seen the major ones. I've been to Empire State, World Trade Center. I guess I haven't been up to, I guess, the Chrysler Building, but that's not as, big.
Mm-hmm.
Been to MSG, thankfully. I've been to the Brooklyn Bridge a couple times. It's nice to walk along it. Statue of Liberty. So there's a lot to see that, not just, the 5 or 6 things that everyone's going to see in the city. And just walking around. So there's like Madame Tussauds, which I'm sure people would be pretty interested, which is like wax figures and stuff. And that's awesome to me. And there's just a lot. Like if you just start walking along, yeah, it'd be great. I think the one thing I want to do now that I'm a bit older is go see a musical on Broadway.
Okay.
I've seen one, which is Spider-Man, like in the dark or something, but that was when I was a kid and I didn't really understand too much.
Okay.
So that's something I do want to do again.
You mentioned that you've been to Madison Square Garden, and I think that's a really good transition to basketball, which you mentioned that you're a big fan of, and like playing with you throughout the first year at Stony Brook, I've definitely seen that like you're a big fan of the sport, and it's definitely something that seems to have impacted your life. So if you want to go into detail about like what your history has been with the sport and how it shaped how you approach life.
Yeah, basketball is a pretty big part of my life now. So I wouldn't say I started off, my roots are basketball. I was a big soccer guy. I still am a big soccer guy. When I'd love to watch soccer. But I grew up playing soccer and watching a lot of baseball. And it wasn't until about like 2009, 2010 when I started actually, watching a bit of basketball because I was playing it at school.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously you click on the TV and the one team that shows up happens to be the Knicks. So
Yeah.
it's like, all right, they happen to be on, why not watch them? And I started to follow them with like great passion. Right around them, there were pretty big free agent transactions that came in, and Amari Stoudemire, and then obviously Carmelo Anthony came in through trade. So big names coming into a big city just really impacted me as a person. It was a lot of fun to watch, but other than watching it, like playing it has been like a huge part of my life. Competitively, I've only been playing, I'd say I started playing in 8th grade and that was about it. And then we started playing intramurals again, so that was a lot of fun. But other than that, I always use basketball to, just take my mind off stuff. If I ever needed to calm myself or release a bit of anger, I'm very more than okay to just go out and put 100 shots up and I'll be fine to come back in.
Yeah, something I feel like a recurring theme with the guests on my show who play sports with Sanjeet in my last episode and my cousin in the show before that,
Right.
is that they both feel that sports is a way for them to essentially like get some relief from their lives and not have to worry about like either academics or external pressures in their life. And something that was really interesting was that in the second episode, my cousin even said that sports helps her out to the point that if she wasn't doing it, she just would not be doing as well in her academics, because
That's right.
it just serves as a way for her to take her mind off of something that's a big part of her life, but should not be the only thing that's encompassing what she does.
I think like one of the more important things is once it becomes like a chore or something you have to do, it doesn't feel as fun. When you want to do it is when I feel like you're enjoying something, and that goes with anything, not just sports. So yeah.
So you've been a Knicks fan since 2009, right? Not a Nets fan, just to clarify.
No, of course not. They're New Jersey still. They don't count as New York.
So I was kind of curious about how, because as of recently, in the last few years at least, the Nets have started to gain some more relevance in terms of being a competitive basketball team. So how has that dynamic of Brooklyn taking a bit more like media attention and liking from the city, how is that? Have you seen those kind of tensions between the Knicks and Nets start to come into play, or how has that dynamic kind of evolved over time?
Yeah, I know when Brooklyn moved in, I forget which season, it may have been 2012, 2013. But when they moved from New Jersey to Brooklyn, right away there was all the fans, they're pretty hype about, having a team in Brooklyn, having another rivalry in New York. You have the Mets and the Yankees, the Jets and the Giants, the Islanders and the Rangers, and even the Devils, right? So you always have a bit of that rivalry. And, having a second New York team made it, pretty cool. I think that season they had Darren Williams and then a couple other players like Joe Johnson. So there
Mm-hmm.
were very good players going at it with each other. So there was that consistent rivalry, and then both teams fell off. And then the Nets, they made a few good moves. Last season when they're in the playoffs, it was actually very fun to watch, even as a Knicks fan. One of my closest friends is a true Nets fan, not one of the bandwagons. But watching the Nets go at it with Joel Embiid and the Sixers was great. I'm sure you love that series, but
Yeah, that was a really fun series to watch. It got a bit testy at times though, because Jared Dudley, I think it was game two. He just tried at game three, I think, because I think it was in the Nets building.
it was
They
the
just
first game. Yeah, first game in Brooklyn. So that was Jared Dudley and Ben Simmons are going at it.
and then he started the fight with Jimmy Butler at one point, and then both of them got ejected, and that was just a really interesting moment because I feel like not even as a Nets fan, but just like as a New Yorker, it must have been really cool just to see like a team represent the city and kind of take it to that national level where they're getting attention and a bit more respect is starting to be placed on, I guess, the sports organizations of New York City.
The thing I'd say with that is the Knicks have always been respected for, just playing in Madison Square Garden.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Jordan even said, his favorite place to play was MSG. LeBron thinks he's the king of MSG. We all know the truth, but the Knicks have always had some respect. I think the last year or so, the respect has gone down. But if you look at Forbes, they're always going to be one of the more not just the wealthiest team, but the more valuable teams, just because of where they play. And even if the Nets are doing well, the team that's going to represent the Knicks, the city, is always going to be the Knicks for me. You
Gotcha.
can't replace the Knickerbockers.
I think the history of the organization also has to just be taken into account because ignoring like the early 2000s or mid 2000s really, where Isaiah Thomas was the GM slash.
Oh, head coach, GM. I lost all my respect for him.
But I feel like the 90s and before that were just very historical and significant in terms of the players that were on that team and the success that they were able to have. I think it was like what, one year they were the eighth seed and made it to the finals. So
Yeah, 99, 98, or 99, 2000, 98, 99, can't remember. But eighth seed, they made it to the finals, lost to the Spurs in five. But, just seeing that's the true grit and grind of a New Yorker. That doesn't happen overnight. But that was, obviously I wasn't born, but looking back at it as a Knicks fan, it's something to be proud of. That whole 90s era, making it to the finals, even, pushing Jordan to the limit. But yeah, all that is pretty important to look at. The early 70s and late 60s with Walt Frazier and others. All that is pretty important in our history.
no, absolutely, for sure. It's just a major part of how basketball was able to develop as a sport. You wanted to touch upon how the NBA might resume sometime this year in either Las Vegas or Orlando. So, are there any thoughts that you want to unpack?
So before maybe like 2 weeks ago, my idea was there's no way we should restart, call off the season. It's not going to make a big difference in basketball, in my opinion. Unlike other sports, especially in soccer, I'd say, because there's the aspect of promotion and relegation. Teams are going to go down in division and teams will move up. That's not the case as necessarily in basketball. I think most of your record determines your draft pick, and even that doesn't do too much as we've seen the past few years. But I think Mark Lasry, which is the Bucks owner, was talking about having the season played in Las Vegas or Orlando, and I think the ESPN Sports Complex or something would be host to literally all the teams, all 30 NBA teams. I think it'd be pretty cool to see, but at the same time, it's also a bit scary thinking about the number of fans that could be lined out in a sports complex looking for their favorite player. Not just in basketball, but in soccer. I think one of the players said it'd be like you're in like prison in heaven because you're isolated in a place, but you're also in Disney at the same time, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. That's a really interesting analogy, actually.
Yeah.
So, in terms of if they are to restart the season, what do you feel is the best way to go about it? Like, should there just be no fans allowed at all? Should they just go straight to playoffs or continue with some regular season games to see if the seedings change by any chance?
That's a great question. I mean, the playoff race was just heating up. The 8th seed in both conferences were up for grabs. I'd say the 6, 7, and 8 were up for grabs in the Western Conference. New Orleans was just getting into their stride.
Mm-hmm.
Portland was just getting in to their stride as well. So that would have been pretty cool to see. I think something Spencer Dinwiddie brought up a couple weeks ago was maybe even a month ago was like having like a March Madness type bracket in which obviously you have your 1 seeds, but it goes all the way down to around 20 or 25. I forget the number of teams, but that would be pretty cool. The first few rounds be like maybe 3 best of 3, best of 5. Then obviously NBA finals and conference finals and such would be your best of 7 series. So I think that would be pretty cool, and I'd bring a lot of attention into the sport, given the current climate. So it was a good idea by him.
No, I think you made some really good points there. I think something that would be really interesting to see is, and I don't think that they'll ever go to this, but like if they ever decide to experiment with a best of 1 game.
Oh yeah.
Really insane to see, because you see with these best of 7 series that a player has some margin to like mess up a game but come back in the next game. But if you pretty much treat it as like a March Madness bracket, as you said, then there's just no room for error. We get to see who are the big time performers who are who are more hesitant to step up and deliver. But I don't think that would really happen, just because there'd be a lot of complaining among the Players Association, which has some power. More power than before nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, that's what makes March Madness so great. It's also the amount of fans that come in, making your bracket. Last year you had Duke, the powerhouse. In my eyes, I looked through the bracket and I never put a 1 seed as the champion. But that was the 1 year I did, and Duke, lost to Michigan State, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. A great team, say the Clippers or the Lakers, they could definitely falter to a team like, say Brooklyn Nets. You know what I'm saying? It only takes 1 bad game from 2 or 3 players to mess up a whole season, or in this case, a whole game.
You want to talk about Spencer Dinwiddie's GoFundMe. So if you want to tell the viewers what that was all about for the period of time when he had that up.
Yeah, I mean, when I first read it, I was pretty confused, to say the least. Then I went on his Twitter and just started reading of it, and I was mind blown that an NBA player could think about asking fans for money. I always had a joke. I think one of my closest friends always told me they should make the fans the owner, and I always thought that can't happen. Things would go crazy. But in that case, I always had a joke. We'll pay Enes Kanter $10 million from our own pocket and let him come on for a minimum, and you'll be on the Knicks. You know what I'm saying? But the idea of paying a player nearly $24 million from the pocket of certain fans with no guarantee that he would join your team is mind blowing. And I don't think he's crazy for asking that, because Spencer Dinwiddie is a smart guy. I know he tried, or I don't know if it happened, but he tried converting his contract into an investment.
I think it was Bitcoin, right?
It was Bitcoin, yeah. So, I mean, that's now. I think even before, when he signed like an extension, he was trying to convert it into an investment. And this, he was just trying to buy some Bitcoin. So I think he knows what he's doing with his money. It's just not going to work out for a casual NBA fan.
Yeah, he's trying to be a clever man, but fortunately got cut a bit short there. But
yeah,
I'm sure Nets fans were in a bit of a panic about when that initial Twitter poll, or not poll, but that initial tweet came out on his account.
he's a good player. Like, and I feel like my Nets fan, my friend who's a Nets fan, absolutely loves Spencer Dinwiddie. So I know Nets fans love him too. There's no reason why he would choose to do that. So I mean, that was pretty surprising to see.
We'll be back in a few minutes to talk about soccer resuming in Germany and the implications that has for the world of sports. Welcome back to the AA podcast with Saab, and we're going to talk about soccer resuming in Germany, specifically the German, and correct me if I'm mispronouncing this, but Bundesliga soccer league. It restarted a couple of weeks ago because obviously there needs to be some revenue generated to stimulate the German economy. And the way they decided to do that is essentially by resuming games, but with some modifications to the number of people that can be in their arena. So they're still allowing players to play like without masks, obviously, because that would be a bit tough if they had to wear it on the court. But essentially, the way that fan attendance works is that you have, I believe, like under 140 or something fans standing outside the arena watching on like a big screen or something of that nature. And then you have reporters and cameramen inside on the bleachers, but like spread out an adequate amount to account for social distancing. And they essentially are just like playing the role of the media, getting film of the match, taking pictures and whatnot. And then you have the security guards as well. And there's only a certain number of security guards that are allowed, I believe. And in terms of the teams coming to the stadium before the game, there are a lot of precautions, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of like making sure that everyone's wearing a mask, that teams come at different times to avoid like congestion in the locker rooms. Not too many media members are like allowed to be in the locker room at a specific time to like account for the fact that you can't just like have everyone being congested in the locker room. Right. So at least for you, you mentioned that you're a big soccer fan. So how has like having this series of matches in the last few weeks helped you like cope with quarantine? And do you feel that it's a good model for other leagues to follow, presuming that COVID-19 continues to be an issue for the foreseeable future?
Right. I mean, as a fan of sports in general, it's great to see at least something going on, something competitive. You know, the German league, the Bundesliga is pretty close at the top. You know, the first place team and the second place team are within 4 points. So anything can happen in the span of a few games. So in that sense, it was really competitive. And it is definitely a model for a lot of the other teams to follow. I think important point we talked about earlier was fitness. And the way they did fitness is, you know, for around 2 weeks, they trained with each other, practiced with each other, got back to, you know, physical shape to be able to play 90 minutes. And an additional precaution that FIFA took and the leagues took is that they're adding 5 substitutions instead of 3. So each team is allowed to make up to 5 substitutions at 3 different times. I know like some teams will do it at the same time since substitutions are only allowed 3 times. It's kind of confusing. but they aren't allowed to make 5 substitutions in total, which is I think is pretty important for the fitness. And as for the model, I know like English soccer, players are just starting to resume like short training, which is they train in short groups. And I know that what they're doing is they're getting tested for COVID every 3 days. And, it's very tough getting in and out. It's literally like a camp setup. They have people check them, check their temperature, obviously test them. And it's very tough for soccer players in general. And I'd say it's a good idea it's a good method what the Bundesliga is doing for other leagues to follow. And maybe it could be something that, the American leagues in soccer and football, which hasn't started yet, basketball, things like that could start hopefully soon using similar precautions.
So have you heard, I'm just curious if you've heard any like post-game interviews with players, assuming that they've done any after the matches. Have you heard what they've thought of the new format and what playing in it was like for them and how it might have differed from what they're traditionally used to?
Yeah, so a main one I saw was from an American, Weston McKennie. He plays for Schalke in the Bundesliga. And they got battered 4-0, so they lost pretty badly in their first game back. But the main thing he said was it didn't feel like they were playing, a soccer game. A lot of I think LeBron touched on it, it wouldn't be the same without the fans. And it's definitely not the same without having fans, cheer you on. There's only so much you can do from your home. It's that atmosphere that's created in soccer games and other sports arenas that, truly bring the best out of a player.
Mm-hmm.
When a player is really enjoying it, they're not doing it for the money or for themselves. They're really doing it for the fans. And having that little support system not be there is pretty different.
Yeah, I think the way LeBron described it, or the way I heard someone else describe it, was pretty much without fans, you're essentially playing a glorified pickup game.
Exactly.
Where just the only difference is that it's being broadcasted now. So in terms of like the way players interact with fans, that's just essentially taken out from the entire mix when you're playing in that kind of environment. So do you think that would negatively affect the other leagues if they choose to adopt a similar system and start back up?
I'd say it depends on where you are in a certain, like in the standings, or they say the table. If you're at the top, it'll be pretty important if your fans weren't there, because obviously your fans will help you push you to the end. And same thing if you were towards the bottom. As I mentioned, there's like a relegation and promotion system. So if you're towards the bottom, it's your fans that are going to push your team to bring the best out of them and the best out of their players. And
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely going to affect, the players in general.
Is there a specific, this might be a bit of a more like very niche question, but is there a specific like player or team that you have in mind that would definitely just not benefit from fans not being present? Like, is there a specific fan base that you feel really elevates the performance of a specific team?
Right. Thinking about English soccer, and especially my team, West Ham, it's not a household name, but its fans are what make the team what it is. Right now, we're like right outside of the relegation zone or the drop zone, so we could be playing Division 2 soccer. And the way that the English FA, or the Football Association, is thinking of doing it is if the season does get canceled, they might use like a home and away system or different point tables that could both benefit or hurt us. And being an American, I'm not like super exposed to English soccer. I wasn't until I started watching a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And currently, I'm in like a WhatsApp chat with a bunch of English lads who also support West Ham. At first it was tough to gain their respect being the Yankee, but we all share same respect for West Ham, and hearing their input really shows me like what a lot of the English supporters are feeling about restarting the season. If it's going to benefit us, like I wouldn't mind if the season was canceled, right? But if it's going to hurt us, there's always that what if, like what if the season continued, right? What could have
Mm-hmm.
happened? So.
No, you bring up a great point there, and I feel like that applies for so many of the sports leagues that are out there. Like at least with basketball, you have the entire the Last Dance documentary coming out, and LeBron's still trying to, I guess, prove himself as the greatest player of all time. I don't want to say he's actively chasing it out, but I feel like you can't deny that it's at least on his mind a bit in terms of just making the best career that he can for himself. So there's always that if the season does get canceled, well, what if it continued? Would LeBron have just blown by everyone in the playoffs because they weren't in shape, or would he have suffered because other guys were staying in shape in the process as well? So it just
if he does, I'd say if he does win it and we restart and the season gets canceled, there's always going to be that, it was a fake season, so LeBron's reign doesn't count. Jordan is still the GOAT. There's always that comparison.
That's true. We'll just have to see how it plays out. There's just some factors that I guess are outside of the public's control, except for staying home and being safe.
That's right.
So now we're going to start our power rankings for this week. And because we have a New York Knicks fan in the house, we were wondering if you could go through your top 5 favorite Knicks players, because as I mentioned before, a bunch of history for the team in terms of just the players, the events, the other players who have been in the arena and the games that have happened there. So just walk me through your top 5 from 5 to 1, and maybe give a bit of justification as to why each player's there.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to order these, and it's not going to be based on their merit or their all-time greatness, but it's going to be based on who I love as a Knick in general. So at number 5, it's going to be Pablo Prigioni. Not a household name again, but pass first point guard. He only played with the Knicks for about 2.5 years, but he was our playoff in our 2012-13 season. He was our starting point guard. Awesome player, just amazing player, amazing defender, amazing passer. Always did that one thing that made a difference. And Pablo Prigioni, what a player. I think at number 4, it's the first jersey I bought, Amari Stoudemire. Standing tall and talented stat, coming to New York from Phoenix is a big move. There's always that talk of LeBron and joining Amari here when he went to Miami instead. There's also that what if. But Amari was great. First year was amazing, all-star starter. Obviously, Melo came in, sort of stunted his growth, I'd say. But at the same time, Amari was having a lot of injury problems, and that I felt overshadowed a lot of his game. I'd say if he was healthy, he would be still a top player in this league.
My favorite is just the standout memory I have of Amari is not necessarily a player game, but just this one clip I've seen online where he's posting up, and I think either a guard or some forward flops when he bangs into him. He reaches down to help him like an ultimate savage.
I think it was a Miami player. I can't remember who, but yeah. He also had that game winner. Well, it wasn't a game winner against the Celtics. Literally, that was a crazy moment, but he missed out by 0.2 seconds. But yeah.
When he was healthy, he was just so athletic and so powerful. It was hard to just stop him if you were in the lane.
That year, I think he had 10 straight 30-point games or something. So he was on fire. He was amazing. Yeah. I think heading into 3 is another not household name, Steve Novak, or Novocaine as Clyde Frazier calls him. Amazing shooter, probably the best shooter of all time. No one's taking that from him. Did a signature discount double check whenever he hit a 3 from Aaron Rodgers because he's from Wisconsin. Steve Novak. He was in the 3-point contest. Just great Knick, great guy. Always found his spot. He was never. I think there was this one time. My favorite moment of him is when he was on the break, and he's pretty tall. He's 6'7", 6, maybe even 6'10". Yeah, everyone was expecting him to dunk, and he goes and lays it up. I get he's a shooter, but That's definitely my favorite moment of him. But another favorite moment was him and JR against the Celtics, just constantly just hitting from deep.
Hmm.
That game was crazy. Yeah. I think at number two, icon of the city, icon still playing basketball is Carmelo Anthony. Uh, I mean, I didn't really know too much about him when he first joined the Knicks. Obviously, I knew he was an all-star, knew he was a top player in the league. But it's when he came, I think he played his first game against the Bucks or someone. He didn't do too much, played his game, played off ball, then started to score.
Hmm.
But right after, he started hitting a lot of game winners against Memphis. I'd say my favorite, oh, this is hard, my favorite moment from Melo. Because obviously there's the one that stands out, the 62-point game.
Hmm.
It was a bad season, but Melo just played really well out of his mind. He could have done even better, in my opinion. But I wish they kept him in the whole game. He could have gone for at least 80. But yeah, another moment that stands out. I think a lot of people know this one. The three to tie against the Bulls and then the three to win it, both at
Oh
the
yeah,
Garden.
like same spot if I'm not mistaken. But
Yeah,
like the second three that he hit, I remember I was watching some highlights from that game and I was like, man, like this guy's got to be guarding him pretty much at his hip at this point.
that's what I'm
Like
saying.
he just like pulled up in his face and just buried it.
I forget which three it was, but Mike Breen asks Jeff Van Gundy, should the Knicks foul? Jeff Van Gundy, no. Melo hits the three. Good times. Yeah, Melo is a great player. I think he deserves to be retired as a Knick. I think next year we could even see him in the Knick colors again, especially if we get CP3. Yeah, Melo's up there. And the last player, top player, my top favorite Knick. Haven't seen him play, never seen him play in real life, obviously, because he's a member of the 70 and 73 championship teams. It's Walt Clyde Frazier. Um, you know, obviously grew up hearing his voice, him and Mike Breen, but also hearing about what he did as a Knick, not just his game style, but also his fashion sense.
Mhm.
There's even a page on Instagram called Clyde So Fly. I suggest you guys check it out of someone rating um, his outfit for the game, like things like that. Clyde Frazier is an icon, and my favorite moment of him was actually meeting him.
Oh
Uh,
really? Oh.
yeah, I got to meet him 2 years ago at a meet and greet. It's this watch company, Tissot, however you say it.
Hmm.
But they did a meet and greet. Me and my friend went out, saw him. I told him like it's weird hearing your voice in person, and he gave me a little chuckle. But yeah, awesome guy.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah,
So I feel like with Melo, at least, I just wanted to go back on it, but I feel like nowadays, Melo is just either like appreciated for being like a scorer for the Blazers, or people just kind of trash on him a bit too much. I'm not saying he's like a top 10 player, but I just feel that less respect is put on his name just because like of the stuff that happened with OKC and Houston, where he was adamant on being a starter, and
yeah.
that just kind of ruined his perception. But I feel like you cannot really deny the talent he has as a scorer on the Knicks, and how he has transformed his role a bit playing on the Blazers.
I mean, his flexibility really showed this year. He played in a lot of catch and shoot roles with Dame and CJ
Mhm.
having the ball most of the time. So I mean, seeing Melo, spot up for three, to his little three to the dome celebration, it was good to see. And I'm sure the Knicks would have brought him back if we were more competitive.
Mhm.
Um, we wouldn't want to ruin his legacy even more. Coming to New York, he had a lot of expectations. He brought us one great season and a couple good seasons.
Mhm.
Obviously, we traded him to a contender and didn't go as well. Then the Rocket situation happened. So there's a lot of questions around Melo, and I think part of it was addressed when he was on ESPN and did that whole interview with Stephen A. and I think Max. But it happens. He's one of the greatest players to play the game of basketball. Definitely not a top 10 player. I think the question about the rings are there, but definitely one of the best scorers of all time.
We just got to appreciate his greatness.
Exactly.
All right, that is it for today's episode of the AA Podcast. Episode 4. Can't believe I've gotten to 4 and not stopped at 1. So we're going to keep putting these out for you guys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you like the content that you see. If not, feel free to reach out to me in the contact info that I've listed in the description. Email me. What could I be doing better? Because I'm always willing to take input and modify the way I approach things. Sab, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come on the podcast. Really appreciated you coming on and talking about a variety of topics.
Yeah, my pleasure. And everyone, please like, comment, subscribe, show this man some love. He's doing a great job, and he's going to keep putting out great content for you guys.
Thank you so much, Sab. I hope you all stay safe, and until the next episode, peace out.